Number 3, becoming one with the ground. What significance for us as the wheel of transformation turns has the phrase becoming one with the ground? We have seen that letting go means relinquishing the forms and structures which, in the conditions of our life, in space and time, have gradually evolved. These conditions are the means whereby the worldly personality, revolving around fixed points and prompted by its desire for security, maintains itself by working simply for itself or the community. To the extent that these conditions become crystallized, they obscure the vital ground. Man feels himself to be burdened with unused energies and impulses that, because they have been repressed, recoil upon him and may even paralyze and destroy him. Psychologically understood, the transforming ground is, in terms of human existence, the realm of the mother, and unresolved relationship between child and mother causes an obstruction in this sphere and hinders development. The effect is the same when the mother denies the warmth necessary for the child's growth, or, on the other hand, holds on to him with a devouring, possessive love. In the first instance, when the child becomes a man, he is inhibited and depressed because he rejects the protests that rise from his depths, defending himself against them by thrusting them down into the unconscious. In the second, he dreads the power of all that embodies the Great Mother in the world for fear it should devour him. When the ground has been thus blocked, he is robbed of the powers that reign within him for the purpose of redemption, protection, and transformation. Thus, he becomes wholly dependent on his world ego, experiencing his repressed depths as frightening forces that either inexplicably attract him or demonically turns against him. On the other hand, the ground is also the bridge by which we are brought to experience the maternal aspects of transcendental being, that which nourishes, sustains, remolds, and liberates all that exists in the world. Thus, whenever man is cut off from this maternal ground, he is always, at the same time, barred from the alternating rhythm of death and becoming, which itself is a part of life. In all ages, divine being has dwelt in man as plenitude, order, and unity. Of old, it was revealed, as man believed, in the power, wisdom, and love of the gods. But today, we are beginning to realize that divine being is within the sphere of man's own experience. This is particularly true for those who, in fear and despair, have come up against the limits of the strength and wisdom of their world ego, and for others who, lacking the support of communities that are disintegrating, as once the old gods disintegrated, are thrown back on themselves. Just as divine being, striving to manifest itself, is present within us, so the experience of union with it becomes, at the same time, an experience of our own being. And equally, the experience of our own being is an experience of our oneness with divine being. If we have once become conscious of ourselves in our essence, we have become conscious of our union with transcendental being. We must, therefore, search for that being which liberates us and inwardly determines our form, and thus discover within ourselves an immanent transcendence, far beyond the frontiers of our little ego. We shall not succeed in finding it, however, until our world ego carapace has become permeable. On the other hand, our ability to do without the scaffolding in which we are upheld by our world ego depends on the strength which we are upheld by our world. On the other hand, Our ability to do without the scaffolding in which we are upheld by our world ego depends on the strength of our contact with divine being. So it is an endless cycle. It is only to the extent that we learn to dissolve the rigidity of established forms and ingrained ideas of how we should be and act in the world that our essential being can lastingly awake within us. Letting go requires us to withdraw from all theoretical and practical positions by which, on the level of our worldly existence, we keep up the struggle against nature and destiny. When this struggle deprives us of our essential power, we are bound to attempt to free ourselves from our habit of rational classification, although, in an intellectual sense, this may well be indispensable. It cannot be denied that a proper understanding of the values that are accepted by the world in which we live is a necessary stage on the way to becoming a person. It is, in fact, the means whereby the egocentric, natural, pre-personal ego, with all its violent drives, is made to submit to order and custom. It teaches man to conquer his willfulness through service to something above him, when, however, the ego gives itself over to any paternal authority, to the community, to habit, a religious teaching, or work in the world, the effect often goes beyond the control of the primary ego. An example, the as yet uneducated ego one finds in a baby, causing the individuality of our true being to be repressed. Such service and obedience may hinder and limit the immediate uninhibited contact with true life. From this point of view, it is clear that the so-called reliable man, the strong personality, is by no means also a constantly maturing person or one permeable to divine being. In order to become a person, it is necessary to be completely open to life and to accept and integrate essential being. But before integration can occur, essential being must awaken, come forth, and outface the difficulties of coming to terms with the world, whether the world is be whether the world be friendly or inimical. Our discovery of essential being as a reality within ourselves entails also our concurrence in its demand that it become a reality in the world. Essential being is the unconditioned, creative, motivating power of human existence, which demands to be given form and which no amount of conditioning has the power to stifle. For this reason, man, finding himself imprisoned in those ingrained habits that prevent essential being from entering his consciousness and coming in contact with the world, is brought to the utmost extremity. When his world ego is estranged from divine being, even though his essential being is inevitably linked to it, man sooner or later experiences not only the suffering inherent in such estrangement, but also the mysterious tugging of the cord that joins him to his hidden inner self and from which he is never entirely free. To the extent to which he separates himself from his ego, he will experience this tugging as a painful longing for deliverance. He knows himself summoned by conscience. Something is lovingly drawing him home. Our answer to this summons can only be the determination to work on ourselves in the right way. The more obdurate and unyielding our concepts and attitudes have become through our conditioning in the world, the harder will it be for essential being to emerge. Instead, its repressed energy will be transformed under such circumstances into a dark force which, in the shape of the shadow, acts destructively in and through our unconscious. It is, of course, necessary that man should be ethically disciplined. If, however, this results merely in the erection of some ego superstructure and does not bring about true transformation. It would also cause repression. Man cannot achieve freedom until he cleanses the ground, recognizes his repressions, and by directing them into fruitful channels, renews his acceptance of the powers of the deep. It should be remembered that the ascent to the bright peaks of true being is always preceded by a descent into the dark depths, an example, into those areas which have been thrust down into the unconscious. It is only when we perceive and accept the shadow and painfully recognize our erroneous responses to life, when we perceive, assimilate, and live through the archetypal figures which personify the repressed energies, or the devouring mother, etc., that the way towards true union with essential being is opened, and the new self, born from essence, becomes free to grow. All such efforts are fundamentally an expression of obedience to the summons which bids us find the way from our state of alienation back to our beginnings. In other words, to enter into the ground in order to emerge remade in accordance with essential being. It is a paradox, however, that we can only discover our true home by realizing the extent to which, in the world, we have become estranged from it. But when, by contrasting it with our life in the world, we actually experience our essential home, we are in the position freely and responsibly to bear witness to it wherever, according to destiny, we may live and work among the structures of the I world reality. The chief objective of critical awareness is to recognize how and under what circumstances our state fails to correspond to our essential being, and to perceive that the faulty state is inevitably reflected in faulty attitudes. The purpose of the practice of letting go is to free the way to essential being, and the purpose of the third step in the process of transformation is union with the ground. There are many stages and degrees of union. The highest is that in which we are united with the maternal oneness of being. Here, whatever is inimical to essential being, or has become static and rigid as a result of the workings of the world ego, is melted down and recast in order that the new ego may be born. All lesser stages of union should be measured against this ultimate stage. From the standpoint of this, as we may call it, personal anthropology, all levels of development should be regarded from above, that is to say, from the highest level capable of being achieved by any human being. Man is intended, as his ultimate condition, to reach such a point. His true nature is, in fact, always striving towards this possibility. Even those systems of thought in which man is considered, genetically speaking, as at the bottom, an example in an undeveloped stage, are diluted if they are not orientated towards the highest level for which man is destined. When we speak of transcendental being and the transforming and liberating unity of the ground, the question inevitably arises: is it not presumptuous to inquire into that which so obviously touches the deepest mystery of life and of man, and which is beyond all rational comprehension? Indeed, such inquiry is permissible only if approached with the utmost delicacy. Even so, we should not be so different before this great mystery that our diffidence makes us blind and deaf to essential being. The time has now arrived when man has sufficiently matured to experience a reality which has hitherto belonged solely to the realm of faith. Impressions that come, so to speak, from elsewhere, stirring us to our depths, rousing and enriching and transforming us, enable us not only to believe, but to know without doubt that we participate in a level of being that is quite other that, than that of our familiar world existence, and which we call transcendental. By means of such experiences, we realize that in the secret core of ourselves, we are far more than we are normally aware of being. In particular, we discover that our unconditioned essence always surpasses what we, in our worldly presence, created under abnormal conditions of existence, can never become. Even so, we have, happily, the right to remind ourselves that the mystery of the ground of greater life constantly penetrates our little personal life with its continuous summons and its power of renewal. This can sometimes occur with such intensity that we wonder, amazed, how it can be that the restrictive powers of the ego are so often able to hide true being and repress such mighty energies. Unfortunately, however, for the sake of its own survival and its perennial preoccupation with external facts, the ego continues to work its will within us. Even so, divine being stirs in our darkness, bestowing on us, when at last the depths begin to stir and the veil of conceptualization falls, its illuminating experiences. When a man goes out to meet these intimidations of being and, faithfully pursuing his practice, breaks through the barriers of the system in which life habitually presents itself to its thinking and acting world ego, then he is at the point of entering the way of the soul's initiation. Our generation is witness to a decisive turning point in man's development, the opening of the initiatory way, formerly the exclusive province of the mystics, to all those who have arrived at this level of maturity. Once the third step, union with the ground, has been taken, then in the language of essential being, divine being arises in its threefold aspect as plenitude, whose strength from then on sustains, supports, nourishes, and renews a man no matter what his difficulties, as order, from which there emerges a hitherto undreamed of purpose that obliges him to create himself anew, and as an all-embracing unity through which he becomes aware and rests upon the world of oneness beyond this world. Such an experience, making, as it does, all things new, sets man once and for all on the way, and transforms him from subjectum mundi to subjectum Dei, which is the great experience. Note, see Durckheim in Im Zeichen den großen Erfüllung, the great experience. The breakthrough to essence. Note again, see Durkheim, Durchbruch zum Wesen, breakthrough to being. We cannot achieve it by willing it, nor can we intentionally bring it about. All we can do is to prepare ourselves for it. This preparation is the chief aim of all man's existential self-exploration and practice, and by performing it, he is committed to becoming, above all else, a servant of divine being. Many lesser experiences of contact with being may proceed and act as pointers towards this great experience. They are like lights on the way, which lead towards the goal. But, in fact, any genuine meditation in which we succeed in letting go of our world ego may bring a foretaste of what is to come. It is possible, too, that a spark of the light which pierces us during the great experience may blaze up in any life situation to which we fully give ourselves. It can happen at those times when we find the courage to forego all the ego's prejudices, defenses, and reservations, and no matter what the cost, allow them to die in order that truth may live, to the extent that the process of transformation takes root in man so that he learns at last to let go, affirming and yielding to all that is in his depths. So will the liberating, illuminating, kindly spark of the great light shine more and more frequently until finally it becomes a part of the basic stuff of life. This will occur all the sooner if a man also finds the courage to allow the pure primary impulses to arise freely from essential being. That is to say, those impulses which have not yet been classified and appropriated by the ego. If he can do this, there will develop, side by side with this, a more stable attitude, a new and loftier way of being in the world. The center and meaning of life will now no longer be in the world, but in divine being. No longer in the self-seeking, self-preserving world ego, but in the essence that is constantly bringing about transformation. This whole process results in the formation of a new consciousness. For whereas the consciousness of the world ego is formed from and made effective by such static concepts as rational determination, the need to classify and the habit of thinking in terms of opposites, the growth of higher consciousness, which is centered in essential being, is evidenced by the rising up of that strength which can face the bottomless abyss and accept the contradictions inherent in life, while at the same time admitting the transcendental powers. When man is open to all these, he experiences such an increase of strength that he is able to realize his own essential form, even under worldly conditions. It is inevitable that our first approach to transcendental being should shake the structure of our ordinary life. Such encounters occur much earlier in life than is generally supposed. First experiences may arise in early childhood during the transition from one level of consciousness to another. They often occur at the moment when the original oneness is shattered and the child discovers that his I and the world are not one, that, in fact, they are in opposition to each other. The child cannot attempt to grasp the purpose that lies behind this incomprehensible experience. But the grown man feels himself compelled to try to understand intellectually the breakup of the old shell that brings him the experience of being. And this compulsion can have disastrous effects. As long as his world ego remains dominant, he immediately transforms into mental concepts any recurrent awareness of essential being. In the same way, this grown man, when sought out by the divine, will always be tempted at the moment of encounter, the moment when it might be possible to discover that which, in his essential being, he has searched for all his life to label, fix, and classify the experience. And by so doing, he loses it. Man cheats himself of the benefit of any shock that may have been vouchsafed him when he tries to reduce its incomprehensible and, for that reason, frightening content to familiar concepts and images. As a consequence, the numinous core of the experience and the sense of blessedness that arises from it are lost. If we are to be receptive to the ground of being, we need to have the courage to meet the unknown, to renounce the right to cognize and tabulate, and to endure the mystery that which cannot be conceptually comprehended. In short, to pause and inwardly dwell in that to which we are all too unaccustomed, the radiance of divine being. The practice of becoming one with the ground, the third spoke in the wheel of transformation, requires above all practice in learning to endure the awakening of essential being in the conscious mind. Therewith, a new dimension arises which is forever inaccessible to the world ego. Everything that serves to undermine the foundations or to destroy the supports on which the world ego has hitherto relied and established itself implements the exercise that prepares us for this kind of inner knowing. Not only does it now become necessary for us to question every apparently secure and consolatory opinion, the ego's fear of pain and annihilation, which arises from its concern for its own survival, has also to be conquered. It is only when man has learned to risk over and over again all that has seemed assured that that which is forever unknowable breaks luminously upon him. Only then can greater life bestow on us its light as well as its darkness. Only then can divine being enfold, renew, and transform us. The man who, being really on the way, falls upon hard times in the world will not, as a consequence, turn to that friend who offers him refuge and comfort and encourages his old self to survive. Rather, he will seek out someone who will faithfully and inexorably help him to risk himself so that he may endure the suffering and pass courageously through it, thus making of it a raft that leads to the far shore. Only to the extent that man exposes himself over and over again to annihilation can that which is indestructible arise within him. In this lies the dignity of daring. Thus, the aim of practice is not to develop an attitude which allows a man to acquire a state of harmony and peace, wherein nothing can ever trouble him. On the contrary, practice should teach him to let himself be assaulted, perturbed, moved, insulted, broken, and battered. That is to say, it should enable him to dare to let go his futile hankering after harmony, surcease from pain, and a comfortable life in order that he may discover, in doing battle with the forces that oppose him, that which awaits him beyond the world of opposites. The first necessity is that we should have the courage to face life and to encounter all that is most perilous in the world. When this is possible, meditation itself becomes the means by which we accept and welcome the demons which arise from the unconscious, a process very different from the practice of concentration on some object as a protection against such forces. Only if we venture repeatedly through zones of annihilation can our contact with divine being, which is beyond annihilation, become firm and stable. The more a man learns wholeheartedly to comfort the world that threatens him with isolation, the more are the depths of the ground of being revealed and the possibilities of new life and becoming opened. The encounter with essential being which sets us free from all the bonds of the ego, and the awareness of divine being which puts an end to all worldly attitudes, are joyous and liberating experiences. But the process of becoming one with being, through the dissolution of all that opposes true life, should not be thought of as an end in itself. When the world ego is, as it were, cancelled, the experience of divine being must not be allowed to ebb away. Rather, it must be converted into a creative impulse towards a new form. Only thus is union with the ground of being fulfilled. The whole point of the painful tension between world ego and essential being is that by this process, the secret meaning hidden in this tension becomes clear. In a word, it is to lead man from the wrong way to the right way, not to bring him safe home to some kind of eternal resting place, but rather to draw him on towards the painful, rewarding, never-ending process of transformation. By this means alone can he approach the fulfillment of his destiny, which is to become a person in whom and through whom divine being is revealed in this life. That's the end of part 3 from The Wheel of Transformation, which is in the book The Way of Transformation. And it is called Becoming One with the Ground. I hope you enjoyed that narration. I like this book, and I would like to experiment with these ideas and find out what is the truth. And next time I'm going to read part 4. Bye.